My name is Sarah Drake, and at 64, I learned that betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the child you raised with your own hands. The morning after my husband Martin's funeral, I discovered that some people mistake grief for weakness. They were about to learn how expensive that mistake would be. The funeral had been everything Martin would have wanted: dignified, well-attended, with enough flowers to fill a small garden. I stood beside his mahogany casket in my black Chanel suit, my pearl necklace catching the morning light, accepting condolences with the grace that had been bred into me since childhood. My long gray hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, and despite my 64 years, I knew I still commanded attention when I entered a room. But even as I played the grieving widow, I watched my daughter Savannah and her husband Travis with growing unease. They moved through the crowd like sharks scenting blood, their eyes calculating, their smiles too quick. When people offered their sympathies, they accepted them as if they were the primary mourners, as if Martin had been their loss alone. "Such a tragedy," Mrs. Whitmore from the garden club whispered to me. "But at least you have your family to lean on." If only she knew. The reception was held at our estate, the grand colonial mansion that Martin had bought for us 30 years ago when his construction business first made him wealthy. The $4 million property sat on 12 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, with gardens that I had lovingly tended and rooms filled with antiques we had collected together. I noticed how Savannah and Travis moved through the house that day, touching things, whispering to each other, making mental inventories. When I caught Savannah's eye across the living room, she didn't look away in shame. Instead, she lifted her chin with a defiance that chilled me. After the last guest left, I was exhausted. The weight of grief, the stress of hosting, and the growing dread in my stomach had drained me completely. I kicked off my heels and was heading toward the kitchen for a cup of tea when Savannah's voice stopped me cold. "We need to talk, Mother." I turned to find both of them blocking the doorway, Savannah with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress, Travis in his expensive suit that I suspected Martin had ultimately paid for. Their faces wore identical expressions of barely concealed anticipation. "Can't this wait until tomorrow?" I asked, though something in their posture told me it couldn't. "It's been a long day." "No, it can't wait," Travis said, stepping forward. His voice carried an authority that made my skin crawl. "This concerns the estate." Savannah nodded, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before, a coldness that seemed to look right through me. "We've already spoken to Daddy's lawyer. We know about the will." My heart started beating faster. "What about it?" Travis pulled out a manila folder and opened it with theatrical flourish. "Everything goes to Savannah, as the sole heir. The house, the business holdings, the investment accounts, all of it. $4 million. I stared at the documents he was showing me, my mind reeling. That can't be right. Martin would never. Would never what? Savannah interrupted, her voice sharp. Would never leave his estate to his only child? The child he actually loved. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Savannah, how can you say that?" "Because it's true." She was warming up now, and I could see Travis encouraging her with his eyes. "You were never really part of this family, Mother. You were just convenient. A nice decoration for his arm at business dinners." Travis nodded. "The estate belongs to the Drake bloodline now, not to some woman who married into it." I felt the room spinning around me. Not from grief, from rage. Pure, crystalline rage that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. But I didn't let them see it. Instead, I kept my voice level and asked, "What exactly are you saying?" "We're saying you need to be out of this house by tomorrow morning," Travis said, his smile widening. "We're not giving you a dime. We own everything now." Savannah stepped closer, and I could smell her expensive perfume that Martin had bought her for Christmas. "Don't look so shocked, Mother. You had to know this day would come. Daddy always loved me more than you. This house was meant for us. Us. I repeated. Travis and me. We have plans for this place. Big plans. She gestured around a room that I had decorated, the space where I had entertained Martin's clients and hosted family dinners for decades. We're going to renovate, modernize it, turn it into something worthy of the Cole name. The Cole name. She had taken her husband's name and now wanted to erase mine entirely. Travis pulled out another set of papers. We've prepared a settlement offer. You can take the furniture from your bedroom and maybe that little Honda in the garage. We're being generous, considering you have no legal claim to any of this. I looked at the papers he was holding out, at the smug expressions on their faces, at the way they stood in my living room like conquerors dividing spoils. And something shifted inside me, something cold and sharp and utterly without mercy. Let me see the will, I said quietly. Travis handed it over with a flourish. I scanned the document, noting the date, the signatures, the carefully worded clauses that left everything to my beloved daughter, Savannah Cole. It was dated 3 years ago, long before Martin's health had started declining. This is what you're basing your claim on? I asked. It's not a claim, Mother. It's legal fact. Savannah's voice was triumphant. Daddy made his choice. Now you have to live with it. I folded the will carefully and handed it back to them. You're right about one thing. Someone did make a choice. The question is whether you're going to be able to live with the consequences. They exchanged glances, and I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross Travis's face. What's that supposed to mean? He demanded. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Franklin Dorsey, Martin's attorney, standing on the front porch with his briefcase. That's our lawyer, Savannah said to Travis. He's probably here to make the transfer official. I opened the door and Franklin stepped inside, his gray hair perfectly styled, his expression carefully neutral. At 62, he had been handling the Drake family legal matters for over 20 years, and I had always found him to be scrupulously honest. Mrs. Drake, he said formally, I'm sorry for your loss. Martin was a good man and a valued client. Thank you, Franklin. I gestured toward Savannah and Travis. I believe you've already met with my daughter and her husband. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes, we spoke briefly yesterday. However, there are some additional matters we need to discuss. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. Martin left this specifically for you, with instructions that it be delivered after the funeral. Savannah stepped forward. Whatever it is, it doesn't change anything. We've already seen the will. Franklin's eyes moved from her to me. Mrs. Drake, your husband was very specific about the timing of this delivery. He wanted you to review these documents in private first, before any discussions took place. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. It was thick, substantial, sealed with red wax and Martin's signet ring. My name was written across the front in his distinctive handwriting. What's in there? Travis demanded. I looked at him, then at my daughter, seeing the greed in their eyes, the certainty that they had already won. And I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt since Martin's diagnosis 6 months ago. I suppose we'll find out together, I said, breaking the seal. Hey, beautiful souls, before we continue with Sarah's story, I need to share something important with you. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if this story is resonating with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of women who refuse to be broken. As I opened the envelope, I felt the weight of Martin's final gift to me. Inside were multiple documents, each one more devastating to Savannah and Travis's plans than the last. But I kept my expression neutral as I read, even as my heart began racing with vindication. The first document was dated just 2 months before Martin's death, a completely new will that superseded the one Travis was clutching so proudly. But more than that, it was a masterpiece of legal strategy that showed me a side of my husband I had never fully appreciated. Well, Savannah demanded, her impatience making her voice sharp. What is it? I looked up at her, at the entitled expression on her face, at the way she was already mentally rearranging the furniture. It appears your father left me a letter. A letter? Travis scoffed. That's not going to change anything legal. I continued reading, and what I discovered made my breath catch. Martin hadn't just suspected Savannah and Travis of planning to cut me out. He had known. The letter detailed months of suspicious behavior, overheard phone conversations, and financial irregularities that had caught his attention. But the real bombshell was the investigation he had commissioned. A private detective named William Hayes had been tracking Travis's activities for the past year, documenting a pattern of embezzlement from Martin's construction company. The evidence was all here: forged signatures, diverted payments, fraudulent contracts worth over $200,000. You're taking awfully long with that letter, Savannah said, moving closer. What did he say? I folded the papers carefully and looked at Franklin. These are very comprehensive documents. His nod was almost imperceptible. Your husband was thorough in his final preparations. Travis was getting agitated. Look, whatever sentimental garbage he wrote doesn't matter. The will is clear. Which will would that be? I interrupted softly. The question hung in the air like a blade. Savannah's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, which will? I handed Franklin the documents from the envelope. Perhaps you could explain the legal implications of these papers, Mr. Dorsey. Franklin adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Certainly. Mrs. Drake, your husband executed a new will on September 15th of this year, properly witnessed and notarized, which supersedes all previous testamentary documents. He looked directly at Savannah. This new will leaves the entire estate, including this house, all financial accounts and business interests, to Mrs. Sarah Drake. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the color drain from Travis's face, saw Savannah's mouth open and close without sound. That's impossible, Travis finally managed. We saw the real will. Everything goes to Savannah. The will you saw was indeed genuine, Franklin continued, his voice professionally calm. However, it was superseded by your father-in-law's final testament. In legal terms, the most recent validly executed will takes precedence over all previous versions. Savannah found her voice. Why would he do that? Why would Daddy change his mind? Franklin consulted another document. According to the letter of instruction he left with me, your father became concerned about certain financial irregularities that had come to his attention. Financial irregularities. Travis's voice cracked slightly. Yes. Franklin's tone remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Specifically, evidence of embezzlement from Drake Construction Company, totaling approximately $200,000 over the past 18 months. Now it was Travis who went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. The private investigator's report is quite detailed, I said, pulling out another sheaf of papers. Bank records, forged signatures, diverted payments. Your husband has been very busy, Savannah. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in my daughter's eyes. Mother, there has to be some mistake. The only mistake, I interrupted, standing up and straightening my pearl necklace, was thinking you could steal from this family and get away with it. Travis was backing toward the door now. This is all fabricated. You can't prove anything. I smiled at him. The same cold smile I'd seen Martin use in business negotiations when he held all the cards. Can't I? Tell me, Travis, do you remember the Brennan contract? The one where you diverted the materials payment into your personal account. His face went ashen. How did you? Or the Henderson project, where you submitted inflated invoices and pocketed the difference. I was enjoying this now, watching him squirm. My husband may have seemed distracted these past months, but he was actually very much aware of what you were doing to his company. Savannah turned on her husband. Travis, tell me they're lying. Tell me you didn't steal from Daddy's business. But Travis couldn't meet her eyes. The guilt was written all over his face. Your father gave you so many chances. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. He knew about the gambling debts you brought into this marriage. He knew about your failed business ventures, your tendency to live beyond your means. He even overlooked the smaller borrowings from the company accounts. Borrowings? Savannah's voice was getting higher. He was stealing? But what your father couldn't overlook, I went on, was your plan to steal from me, to throw me out of my own home and leave me with nothing. That's when he decided enough was enough. Franklin cleared his throat. There's one more document you should see. He handed me a final paper. A criminal complaint that your husband filed with the district attorney's office 3 weeks before his death. Travis made a strangled sound. He wouldn't. He was family. Family? I stood up, and despite being 20 years older than this man, I felt powerful in a way I hadn't in months. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't plot to leave an elderly widow homeless. Family doesn't count the silver while the body is still warm. Savannah was crying now, not from grief, but from rage and disbelief. Daddy wouldn't have done this to me. He loved me. He did love you, I said, and for a moment my voice softened. That's why he gave you so many chances to do the right thing. That's why the criminal complaint was never filed. He kept hoping you would come to your senses. But now? Travis asked, his voice barely a whisper. I walked to the window and looked out at the gardens Martin and I had planted together, at the life we had built on these 12 acres. When I turned back, my expression was ice. Now my husband is dead, and you just tried to steal his widow's home. The criminal complaint will be filed tomorrow morning. Mother, please, Savannah started. Don't. The word came out like a whip crack. Don't call me mother. A daughter doesn't do what you did today. A daughter doesn't look at her mother's grief and see opportunity. Franklin was gathering his papers. Mrs. Drake, I'll need you to come to my office tomorrow to formalize the estate transfer. And I should mention, your husband also left instructions regarding the criminal charges. What instructions? Travis demanded. Franklin's smile was sharp. If anyone attempted to challenge Mrs. Drake's inheritance or force her from this house, the evidence was to be turned over to the authorities immediately. He looked at his watch. I believe that threshold has been met. As they absorbed this information, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any I had experienced in years. Martin had protected me even from beyond the grave, and now these two greedy, heartless people were about to learn what real consequences felt like. You can't do this, Savannah said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm your daughter. A daughter I no longer recognize, I replied. The woman I raised would never have done what you did today. She would never have looked at her mother's tears and seen dollar signs. Travis grabbed Savannah's arm. We need to leave. We need to call our own lawyer. By all means, I said. Though I should warn you, embezzling from a family business while planning inheritance fraud doesn't create much legal wiggle room. As they headed for the door, Savannah turned back one last time. The mask had finally dropped completely, and I saw her clearly for what she had become, a stranger wearing my daughter's face. This isn't over, Mother. I adjusted my pearls and smiled. Oh, darling. It's only just beginning. The next morning, I woke in my own bed, in my own house, for the first time in days without the crushing weight of uncertainty on my chest. Martin's documents lay spread across my mahogany desk, each page a testament to his final act of love and protection. I had spent hours the night before reading every detail of the private investigator's report. William Hayes had been thorough, photographing bank deposits, documenting Travis's gambling habits at the Foxwoods Casino, tracking the paper trail of diverted funds. My husband had built an airtight case against his own son-in-law, and now it was time to put it to use. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called Franklin Dorsey's office. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the warmth it hadn't shown in front of Savannah and Travis. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I replied, surprising myself with how true that was. "I'm ready to move forward with everything we discussed yesterday." "Excellent. Can you be here at 11? We'll need to file the new will with probate court, and I'd like to discuss the criminal complaint before we submit it to the district attorney." After hanging up, I took extra care with my appearance. I chose a navy blue St. John suit that Martin had always said brought out my eyes, paired with my grandmother's pearl earrings and the diamond wedding band that had become part of me over 37 years of marriage. My gray hair was styled in a perfect chignon, every strand in place. If I was going to war, I would do it looking like the formidable woman Martin had married. Franklin's office was located in the historic district of our town, housed in a restored colonial building that spoke of old money and established families. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, greeted me with the deference due to someone whose family had been clients for over 2 decades. "Mrs. Drake, please accept my condolences," she said. Mr. Drake was a wonderful man.
"Thank you, dear."
He certainly was. Franklin's office was lined with law books and diplomas, the desk covered with neat stacks of documents. But what drew my attention was the additional man seated across from Franklin's desk, a younger lawyer with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet David Chen, our firm's criminal law specialist," Franklin said, then caught himself.
"I'm sorry, David Morrison."
I sometimes confuse names. David Morrison stood and extended his hand. "Mrs. Drake, I've reviewed your husband's evidence package. It's quite comprehensive." I settled into the leather chair across from them, folding my hands in my lap. "What exactly are we dealing with, legally speaking?" Morrison opened a thick file. "Your son-in-law is facing potential charges of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud. The evidence your husband gathered is substantial. We have bank records, forged documents, witness statements from company employees who saw him diverting materials." "And my daughter?" Franklin leaned forward. "Savannah's involvement is more complex. She wasn't directly involved in the embezzlement, but her participation in yesterday's attempt to defraud you of your inheritance creates additional legal exposure." "What does that mean in practical terms?" "It means," Morrison said, "that if we file these charges, both of them are looking at significant prison time. Travis could face 8 to 10 years. Savannah, as an accessory and conspirator, could face 3 to 5. The numbers hung in the air between us. I thought about my daughter as a child, the little girl who used to braid my hair and tell me she wanted to grow up to be just like me. Then I thought about her face yesterday, cold and calculating as she told me I had no claim to my own home. What are my options?" I asked. Franklin pulled out another document. "Your husband left very specific instructions. He wanted the decision to be entirely yours. We can file the criminal complaint and pursue full prosecution, or we can use the threat of prosecution to recover the stolen funds and ensure they never contest your inheritance. And if I choose prosecution, they'll be arrested within 48 hours, Morrison said. Given the strength of the evidence, plea bargaining would likely be their only option. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the town square. Below, normal people were going about their normal lives, shopping, meeting for lunch, taking their children to the park. None of them had just discovered that their own daughter was capable of such breathtaking betrayal. "Mrs. Drake?" Franklin prompted gently. "What would you like us to do?" I turned back to face them, and I felt Martin's strength flowing through me. "File the charges." Morrison nodded. "All of them. Every single one. And I want you to know, gentlemen, that this decision has nothing to do with money and everything to do with character." My daughter looked at her grieving mother and saw an obstacle to be removed. "That tells me everything I need to know about who she's become." Franklin was already reaching for his phone. "I'll call District Attorney Williams immediately. With this level of evidence, they'll move quickly." As he made the call, Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Drake, I should warn you, this is going to become very public. The media will likely pick up the story. Your family's private business will become front-page news." I adjusted my pearls and smiled grimly. "Good. Let everyone see what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." The rest of the meeting was a blur of legal terminology and strategic planning. By the time I left Franklin's office, the wheels of justice were officially in motion. The district attorney had agreed to fast-track the case given the clear-cut evidence, and arrest warrants would be issued within 24 hours. I drove home through the autumn countryside, past the covered bridge Martin had always loved, past the antique shops where we used to spend Saturday afternoons. Everything looked the same, but I felt fundamentally changed. The grieving widow who had attended her husband's funeral 2 days ago was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused, utterly without mercy. My phone rang as I pulled into my circular driveway. Savannah's name appeared on the screen. "Hello, Mother." Her voice was strained, artificial. "Travis and I have been talking, and we think there might be some room for negotiation." "Really?" I kept my voice neutral as I walked into my house, legally and completely. "We realized yesterday was emotional for everyone. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement that's fair to everybody." I almost laughed. Fair to everybody. As if there was some middle ground between theft and honesty, between betrayal and loyalty. "What kind of arrangement did you have in mind?" "Well, obviously the house should stay in the family." "It is staying in the family," I interrupted. "My family. Mother, be reasonable. You don't need all this space. We could set you up in a nice condo, maybe give you a monthly allowance." "Stop." The word came out like a gunshot. "Just stop talking, Savannah." Silence on the other end of the line. "Do you want to know what your father's last words to me were?" I asked. "Mother," he said, "Sarah, you're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." My voice was growing stronger with each word. "He knew what you were planning. He knew, and it broke his heart." "That's not true. Daddy loved me." "He did love you. That's why he gave you every opportunity to prove him wrong. That's why he waited, hoping you would remember the values we tried to teach you." "We can still work this out," she said, but I could hear the desperation creeping in. "As a family. We stopped being a family the moment you decided I was worth nothing more than the furniture in my bedroom." I hung up and immediately turned off my phone. Let her wonder. Let her worry. Let her spend the night thinking about what she had thrown away for money that was never going to be hers anyway. That evening, I sat in Martin's study, surrounded by his books and memories. On his desk was a framed photo from our wedding day, 2 young people who had no idea what life would bring them, but who were ready to face it together. I touched the glass gently. "I promise you, my love," I whispered. "They won't get away with this. Not with stealing from you, and not with trying to steal from me." Outside, the autumn wind was picking up, rattling the windows and stripping the last leaves from the trees. But inside, I felt warm and protected, wrapped in the armor of righteous anger and legal documentation. Tomorrow, my daughter and her husband would learn that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. and I would be there to watch every moment of their reckoning. I was having my morning tea on the sun porch when I saw the police cars turning into my driveway. 3 of them, 2 county sheriff's vehicles, and an unmarked sedan that undoubtedly carried the detective who would be handling the case. I set down my china cup and saucer, smoothed my lavender cashmere sweater, and prepared to enjoy the show. Sheriff Mark Rutledge emerged from the lead vehicle, a man I recognized from various town functions. He was in his mid-40s, with the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of dealing with unpleasant situations. The detective was a woman, tall, professional, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. I opened the front door before they could ring the bell. "Good morning, Sheriff Rutledge," I said pleasantly. "I assume you're here about the Drake matter?" He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Morning, Mrs. Drake. This is Detective Linda Morrison. We have warrants for Travis Cole and Savannah Cole. Our understanding is that they're staying here." "They were," I corrected. "They left yesterday evening after we had a family discussion, but I believe I can help you locate them." I stepped aside to let them in. "Please come in." The officers filed into my foyer, their eyes taking in the crystal chandelier, the Persian rugs, the oil paintings that Martin and I had collected over the years. This was old money elegance, and I could see them noting the contrast with what they must have expected from an embezzlement case. "Mrs. Drake," Detective Morrison said, "we've reviewed the evidence your attorney submitted. It's quite substantial. Can you tell us about your relationship with the suspects?" I gestured toward the living room. "Please sit down. Can I offer you coffee?" "That's kind of you, ma'am, but we're fine," Sheriff Rutledge said. "We'd like to get this resolved as quickly as possible." I settled into my favorite wing chair, the one where I'd read bedtime stories to Savannah 30 years ago, and folded my hands in my lap. Travis Cole is my son-in-law of 8 years. Savannah Cole is my daughter. The words came out steady, matter of fact. Or rather, she was my daughter. I'm no longer certain I can claim that relationship. Detective Morrison consulted her notes. "According to the complaint, they attempted to force you from this house based on a fraudulent inheritance claim?" "That's correct. Less than 18 hours after my husband's funeral, they informed me that I had no legal right to remain in my own home. They gave me until the following morning to remove my personal effects and leave." The detective's expression hardened. "And this was based on what they believed was your husband's will?" "A will that had been superseded by a later document, yes. But they weren't interested in hearing about legal technicalities. They were quite certain they owned everything now." I allowed a small smile. The phrase, "we're not giving you a dime," was used repeatedly. Sheriff Rutledge was writing in his notepad. "Ma'am, do you know where they might be staying now?" "I believe they're at the Marriott downtown. Travis made a rather dramatic exit last evening when he realized the legal situation wasn't quite what he had expected." I stood and walked to the window. "There's something else you should know, Sheriff. This isn't just about inheritance fraud. My daughter's husband has been embezzling from my late husband's construction company for over a year." "Yes, ma'am, that's part of our investigation. The evidence package includes bank records, forged signatures, diverted payments." "Over $200,000, I interrupted. "Stolen from a man who had treated Travis like a son. My husband knew Travis had financial problems when Savannah married him. He gave him a job, brought him into the family business, trusted him with company finances." Detective Morrison leaned forward. "Mrs. Drake, I have to ask, why didn't your husband press charges when he first discovered the theft?" I turned back to face her, and I'm sure she could see the pain in my eyes despite my composed exterior. "Because he loved my daughter. He kept hoping Travis would confess, make restitution, prove that he deserved the trust Martin had placed in him. But that didn't happen. Instead, they planned to steal my home and leave me destitute. That's when my husband realized that some people mistake mercy for weakness."
My phone rang.
I glanced at the caller ID and saw Savannah's name. That's her now, I said to the officers. Would you like me to answer it? Detective Morrison nodded. Put it on speaker if you would. I pressed the speaker button. Hello, Savannah. Mother, thank God. Something terrible is happening. Her voice was high, panicked. There are police officers here at the hotel. They're saying they have warrants. This is all some kind of mistake. No mistake, I said calmly. The district attorney's office has filed charges based on the evidence your father gathered before his death. What evidence? Mother, you have to help us. You have to tell them this is all a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding, I replied, was yours. You misunderstood who you were dealing with when you decided to steal from this family. We didn't steal anything. The inheritance was legally ours. Based on a fraudulent claim, yes. But that's not the only charge, is it, Savannah? Ask Travis about the Brennan contract. Ask him about the Henderson Project invoices. The line went quiet except for muffled voices in the background. Mother, please. Savannah's voice was barely a whisper now. We can fix this. We can pay back whatever Travis took from the company. With what money? I asked. The gambling debts? The credit card bills? The mortgage payments you've been missing on that house you can't afford? Sheriff Rutledge was signaling that he needed to leave. I nodded. Savannah, I need to go now. The officers are here to explain the charges to me. Officers? Mother, what officers? The ones who are about to arrest you. I ended the call and turned off my phone. Detective Morrison stood. Mrs. Drake, we'll need you to come down to the station later today to give a formal statement. Of course. What time would be convenient? How about 2 o'clock? Perfect. I have a hair appointment at 11, but I should be finished by then. Sheriff Rutledge looked surprised. Most people facing a family situation like this wouldn't be thinking about hair appointments. But I had learned long ago that looking the part was half the battle in any confrontation. One more thing, Detective Morrison said. This case is likely to attract media attention. Embezzlement, inheritance fraud, family drama. It has all the elements that reporters love. I walked them to the door, my heels clicking on the marble foyer. Detective, I spent 40 years as the wife of a successful businessman. I've weathered scandals, business disputes, and social gossip. A little media attention doesn't frighten me. And your daughter? How do you think she'll handle the publicity? I paused with my hand on the doorknob. My daughter made her choices when she decided that money was more important than family loyalty. Now she gets to live with the consequences. After they left, I went back to my tea, which had grown cold. I made a fresh cup and sat down with the morning paper. The autumn sun was streaming through the tall windows, warming the antique furniture that Martin and I had chosen together. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Travis. We need to talk. There has to be a way to work this out. I deleted the message without responding. There was nothing to work out, nothing to negotiate. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I had believed them. An hour later, Franklin Dorsey called. Sarah, I just heard from the district attorney's office. Both arrests were made without incident. They're being processed now, and bail hearings are scheduled for tomorrow morning. What kind of bail are we looking at? Given the amounts involved and the flight risk assessment, probably $50,000 each for Travis, $25,000 for Savannah. And if they can't make bail, they'll remain in county lockup until trial, which, given the strength of our evidence, should be fairly quick. I found myself smiling. How quick? 3 to 4 months, assuming they don't drag it out with motions and delays. But Sarah, I have to ask, are you prepared for what this is going to do to your relationship with your daughter? I looked around my living room at the family photos that would need to be updated, at the Christmas stockings I wouldn't be hanging this year. Franklin, My relationship with my daughter ended the moment she told me I wasn't family anymore. What happens now is simply cleanup. By Wednesday morning, the story had broken in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local construction magnate's family faces fraud charges." But by Thursday, it had been picked up by the regional papers, and by Friday, a news van was parked across from my estate. I had expected this, of course. A story involving a wealthy family, embezzlement, inheritance fraud, and a mother pressing charges against her own daughter was exactly the kind of scandal that sold papers and drove website clicks. What I hadn't expected was how much I would enjoy it. I was in my garden Friday morning, deadheading my late-season roses, when a young reporter approached my fence. She was pretty, probably fresh out of journalism school, with the kind of eager expression that suggested she thought this story might make her career. "Mrs. Drake? I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 12 News. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to comment on the charges against your daughter and son-in-law." I straightened up, pulling off my gardening gloves. I was wearing a cream-colored cardigan and perfectly pressed khakis, my gray hair in an elegant low bun, my pearls catching the morning sunlight. I knew exactly how I looked, like everyone's ideal grandmother, the kind of woman who baked cookies and remembered birthdays. "Of course, dear. Though I should mention that my attorney has advised me to be careful about what I discuss publicly." She fumbled for her phone, activating the recording app. "Can you tell us how you're feeling about all this? It must be incredibly difficult to have family members facing criminal charges." I considered my words carefully. "It is difficult, Jennifer, but not in the way you might think." "What do you mean?" "What's difficult is realizing that someone you raised from birth, someone you sacrificed for and loved unconditionally, could look at your grief and see opportunity." I paused, letting that sink in. "What's difficult is learning that the child you would have given everything to is planning to leave you with nothing." The reporter's eyes widened. "So you don't feel conflicted about pressing charges?" "Conflicted?" I considered this. "No, I don't think conflicted is the right word."
Heartbroken, yes.
Disappointed, certainly. But conflicted?
No.
I looked directly into her phone's camera. When someone steals from you, you report it to the police. It shouldn't matter whether they're a stranger or your own child. What about the inheritance dispute? Some people are saying this is really about money. "Let me stop you there," I said, my voice growing firmer. "This was never about money. My husband left me financially secure regardless of the inheritance. This is about character. This is about two people who decided that an elderly widow was expendable." "Can you tell us about the embezzlement charges against your son-in-law?" "I can tell you that my husband was a trusting man who gave his son-in-law every opportunity to succeed. He brought Travis into the family business, taught him the trade, included him in major decisions." I shook my head sadly. That trust was repaid with theft. Over $200,000 stolen from a man who had treated Travis like a son. "Have they tried to contact you since the arrests?" "Multiple times. They seem to think this is all some kind of misunderstanding that can be resolved with the right conversation." I smiled coldly. "But there's no misunderstanding. The evidence is clear, the law is clear, and my position is clear." "What is your position?" "That actions have consequences. That family loyalty isn't a one-way street. And that being related to someone doesn't give you the right to steal from them." After the reporter left, I went inside and called Franklin. "I just gave my first interview," I told him. "Sarah, we discussed this. It's better if you don't." I was very careful. I stuck to the facts, stayed calm, and I think I came across exactly as I intended. Which was how? Like a grandmother who's been deeply hurt but isn't going to be victimized. I poured myself a glass of iced tea. "Franklin, these people tried to steal my home. They planned to leave me destitute while they renovated my house with my own money. I'm not going to hide from that truth." That afternoon, The interview aired on the evening news. I watched it from my living room, noting how the camera had captured the dignity of my home, the careful grooming that spoke of old money and good breeding. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman of substance who had been wronged by her own family. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Helen Radcliffe, my neighbor and longest friend. "Sarah, I just saw you on television. You were magnificent." "Thank you, dear. I thought it went well. That horrible reporter was trying to make you sound vindictive, but you came across as so dignified, so reasonable." Helen paused. "Have you heard from Savannah? She's been calling constantly. I've stopped answering."
Good.
Let her stew in her own choices for a while.
The doorbell rang.
Through the window, I could see a delivery truck. "Helen, I need to go. Someone's delivering something." It was flowers, a massive arrangement of white lilies and roses with a card that read, "Mother, please forgive us.
We can fix this.
All our love, Savannah and Travis." I carried the arrangement to my kitchen and dumped it directly into the garbage disposal. Then I called the florist. "This is Sarah Drake. You just delivered flowers to my address, and I need you to know that I will not be accepting any future deliveries from Travis Cole or Savannah Cole. Please add them to your do not deliver list." "Ma'am, are you sure? They were very expensive." "I'm quite sure. And please call them and tell them their money was wasted." Over the weekend, more reporters appeared. I gave 2 more interviews, each time presenting myself as the wronged but dignified widow who was simply seeking justice. I mentioned Martin frequently, painting him as a loving husband who had tried to protect his family's legacy from those who would exploit it. By Sunday, the story had reached the national news blogs. "Widow presses charges against daughter in inheritance fraud case" was trending on social media. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive. Good for her. Family doesn't give you the right to steal. This woman has more dignity in her little finger than her daughter has in her whole body. I hope she takes them for everything they're worth. Monday morning brought a call from my attorney. "Sarah, I've been contacted by a lawyer representing your daughter and son-in-law. They want to discuss a plea agreement." "What kind of plea?" "Full restitution of the embezzled funds, guilty pleas to reduce charges, and a formal apology." I was quiet for a long moment. What would the reduced charges carry? Probation for Savannah, maybe 6 months in minimum security for Travis.
No.
Sarah.
No, Franklin.
They made their choice when they decided to steal from this family. They made their choice when they told me I was worthless. They don't get to negotiate their way out of the consequences now. The district attorney is pushing for this. It saves the state the cost of a trial. Then the district attorney can explain to the voters why he's letting inheritance fraudsters off with a slap on the wrist. My voice was ice. I didn't ask for this fight, Franklin, but now that it's here, I'm going to finish it. That afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Savannah. It was delivered by a private courier, written on expensive stationery in the careful handwriting I had taught her as a child. "Dear Mother," it began, "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. Travis and I made terrible mistakes, and we hurt you in ways that can never be undone. But please, I'm begging you to find it in your heart to forgive us. We can pay back every penny Travis took from Daddy's company. We can make this right if you'll just give us the chance. I'm still your daughter, no matter what I've done. Please don't let this destroy our family forever." I read the letter twice, then carried it to Martin's study. I sat at his desk, pulled out a piece of my personal stationery, and wrote my response by hand. "Savannah, you stopped being my daughter the moment you told me I wasn't family. You destroyed our family when you decided money was more important than love. There is no forgiveness for what you've done, and there will be no mercy. You made your choice. Now live with it. Sarah Drake." I sealed the letter and called the same courier service to deliver it. Then I sat back in Martin's leather chair and felt, for the first time since his death, completely at peace. Beautiful souls, I want to pause here and remind you that Sarah's strength didn't come from revenge. It came from recognizing her own worth. If you're going through your own season of betrayal or heartbreak, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, will help you find that same inner strength. It's filled with practical steps for rebuilding your life after devastating loss. The link is in the description. Your healing journey starts with a single click. And please, if Sarah's story is touching your heart, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. 3 weeks into October, Franklin called with an update that made my morning considerably brighter. Sarah, I have news about the bail situation. I set down my coffee cup. Do tell. Travis made bail, but barely. His parents had to mortgage their house to come up with the $50,000. But Savannah... He paused dramatically. Savannah is still in county lockup. Apparently, none of her friends were willing to put up $25,000 for her bail bond. I felt a surge of satisfaction. How interesting. And here I thought she had such a strong support network. It gets better. My contact at the district attorney's office tells me she's not adjusting well to jail conditions. She's been complaining about everything from the food to her cellmate. Her cellmate, a woman named Big Betty, who's in for assault. Apparently, Savannah tried to explain that there had been some kind of mistake, that she didn't belong there with people like that. I actually laughed out loud. Oh, the irony. She spent so many years looking down on people she considered beneath her social status. I suppose she's getting a crash course in humility. There's something else. She's been asking to make phone calls to you, which the jail staff has been told to deny, I assume. Actually, you have the right to accept or refuse calls from inmates. They wanted me to ask what you preferred. I considered this for a moment. There was a certain appeal to letting Savannah call, to hearing the desperation in her voice, to knowing that she was finally experiencing real consequences for her actions. But there was also the risk that hearing from her might weaken my resolve. No calls, I decided. She had her chance to be my daughter. She chose money instead. Franklin cleared his throat. The prosecution has asked if you'd be willing to testify. They want your personal account of what happened the day after the funeral. Of course. When? The trial is scheduled to begin November 15th. Your testimony would likely be on the second day. I marked the date in my calendar. What should I expect? Their defense attorney, a woman named Patricia Kellerman, is going to try to paint you as a vindictive stepmother who manipulated a sick old man into changing his will. Stepmother? I was indignant. I raised that girl from the age of 2 when my husband's first wife died. I changed her diapers, taught her to read, stayed up with her when she had nightmares. I know, Sarah. But they're going to argue that you never legally adopted her, that you were always the outsider looking to secure your financial future. The injustice of it took my breath away. They're going to turn me into the villain? They're going to try. That's why your testimony is so crucial. The jury needs to see you as you really are, a grieving widow who was betrayed by the people she loved most. That evening, I spent time in front of my mirror, considering how I would present myself in court. The widow's weeds I had worn to the funeral wouldn't be appropriate. Too theatrical. Too much like I was playing a role. Instead, I would dress like the dignified woman I had always been. Conservative but elegant. Expensive but not flashy. I chose a charcoal gray suit with a silk blouse, my grandmother's pearl necklace, and the diamond earrings Martin had given me for our 25th anniversary. My hair would be styled simply, professionally, in a way that suggested competence without vanity. Over the next several weeks, I worked with Franklin and the prosecutor, a sharp young man named William Hayes, to prepare my testimony. They asked me the same questions over and over until my answers became second nature. Mrs. Drake, Can you tell us about your relationship with the defendant, Savannah Cole? I raised her as my own daughter from the age of 2. Her biological mother died in a car accident, and her father and I married when she was still a toddler. She was the center of our world. And how would you describe your husband's relationship with Travis Cole? Martin treated Travis like the son he never had. He brought him into the family business, taught him everything about construction and project management, included him in major decisions. Mrs. Drake, can you tell the jury about the conversation that took place the day after your husband's funeral? This was the crucial part, the moment where I would need to convey not just the facts, but the emotional devastation of that betrayal. They told me I had no claim to my own home. They said they weren't giving me a dime, that I needed to be out by the next morning. When I tried to reason with them, my daughter, I always paused here, letting the pain show through. My daughter told me that her father had never really loved me, that I was just convenient. How did that make you feel? Like my heart had been ripped out. Not because of the money. Martin had left me financially secure regardless of the inheritance, but because the child I had raised was looking at my grief and seeing opportunity. We practiced until I could deliver these lines with perfect composure, showing just enough emotion to be sympathetic without appearing theatrical. Meanwhile, the media attention continued to build. A true crime blogger had picked up the story, creating a detailed timeline of events that painted me as a wronged woman seeking justice. The comments section was filled with support. This woman is my hero. Family loyalty should go both ways. I hope she takes them for everything. What kind of monster steals from their own mother? She raised that girl from a baby, and this is how she gets repaid? Disgusting. The support was gratifying, but more than that, it was strategic. Public opinion would inevitably influence the jury pool, and having the narrative firmly established in my favor could only help. 2 weeks before the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my greenhouse, tending to my orchids, when Helen Radcliffe appeared at the door. "Sarah, you have a visitor." A young woman who says she's a friend of Savannah's. I looked up from my plants. Did she give a name? Amanda something. She seems very nervous. I followed Helen back to the house, where a young woman in her early 30s was waiting in my foyer. She was pretty, but had clearly been crying, her makeup smudged and her hands shaking. "Mrs. Drake?"
I'm Amanda Phillips.
"I went to college with Savannah, and we've been friends ever since." I gestured toward the living room. "Please sit down. Can I offer you something to drink?" "No, thank you. I came to talk to you about Savannah." "What about her?" Amanda twisted her wedding ring nervously. "She asked me to come. She's desperate, Mrs. Drake. She's been in jail for a month now, and she's not doing well. I imagine jail isn't particularly comfortable for someone who's lived a privileged life. It's not just the conditions. It's the guilt. She knows what she did was wrong. She knows she hurt you terribly." I settled back in my chair, studying this young woman who had agreed to plead her friend's case. "And what exactly is she asking me to do?" "She wants you to know that she's sorry. Really, truly sorry. She said if she could take back everything she said that day, she would." "But she can't," I replied simply.
No, she can't.
"But she's begging you to find some mercy in your heart. She's begging you not to testify against her." I was quiet for a long moment. "Amanda, let me ask you something. If someone stole from your family, tried to throw you out of your home, told you that you weren't worth a dime, would you find mercy in your heart?" Amanda's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. I hope I would." "Well, I don't. Because mercy is something you show to people who make mistakes, not to people who make calculated choices to destroy you." "But she's your daughter."
No, interrupter.
"A daughter doesn't do what Savannah did. A daughter doesn't look at her mother's grief and see $signs. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. She made her choice when she decided money was more important than family. Now she gets to live with that choice. Amanda left, and I felt no regret about my decision. If anything, I felt more resolved than ever. The trial couldn't come soon enough. The courthouse was packed on November 15th. I had arrived early, driven by my longtime chauffeur, Harrison, in the black Mercedes that Martin had bought for special occasions. I wore my charcoal gray suit and pearls, my hair perfectly styled, my composure absolute. The media was out in force. Cameras and reporters lined the courthouse steps, and I could hear the buzz of excitement as I walked past them. This had become the story of the season. The wealthy widow versus her own daughter, with millions of dollars and family honor at stake. Franklin met me at the courthouse entrance, resplendent in his best courtroom attire. "Ready for this, Sarah?" "I've been ready since the day they told me I wasn't family," I replied. Inside, the courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side sat the prosecution team, confident, well-prepared, armed with overwhelming evidence. On the other side sat Savannah and Travis with their defense attorney, Patricia Kellerman, a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of aggressive posture that suggested she planned to fight every charge. I hadn't seen my daughter in person since that terrible confrontation in my living room 6 weeks ago. She looked thin, worn down by her time in jail. Her blonde hair had lost its salon shine, and her orange prison jumpsuit was a far cry from the designer clothes she usually favored. When she saw me enter the courtroom, her eyes filled with tears, and she mouthed the word, "Please." I looked right through her and took my seat behind the prosecution table. Jury selection had taken place the previous week, and Franklin had kept me informed about the process. The final jury was composed of 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. Several were parents, 3 were grandparents, and most came from middle-class backgrounds. Exactly the demographic that would understand both family loyalty and the devastating impact of betrayal. Judge Lorraine Whitfield called the court to order. At 58, she was known for running a tight courtroom and having little patience for dramatics. She was also known for her fairness and her particular intolerance for crimes that targeted the elderly. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor William Hayes began his opening statement. "This case is about trust. Trust between a husband and wife. Trust between a parent and child. Trust between a man and his son-in-law. And it's about what happens when that trust is betrayed in the most calculating and cruel way possible." He painted a picture of Martin as a successful businessman who had worked hard to build a legacy for his family, only to discover that those closest to him were systematically stealing from him. He described my role as the loyal wife who had supported her husband through 37 years of marriage, only to be told by her own daughter that she was worthless. "The evidence will show," Hayes continued, "that Travis Cole embezzled over $200,000 from his father-in-law's construction company, that he forged signatures, diverted payments, and used his position of trust to line his own pockets while gambling away his family's financial security." He turned to address Savannah directly. "And the evidence will show that Savannah Cole, rather than supporting her grieving mother, chose to participate in a scheme to defraud Mrs. Drake of her rightful inheritance. They planned to throw an elderly widow out of her own home and leave her with nothing more than the clothes on her back." The jury was listening intently, several of them glancing toward Savannah with expressions of disgust. Then it was Patricia Kellerman's turn. She stood slowly, dramatically, and walked toward the jury with the confident stride of someone who believed she could rewrite the narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is indeed about trust, but it's also about greed. The greed of a woman who saw an opportunity to manipulate a sick, elderly man into leaving her everything, cutting out his only biological child in the process." I felt my jaw clench, but kept my expression neutral. "Sarah Drake was Martin Drake's second wife," Kellerman continued. She never legally adopted Savannah, never took on the financial or legal responsibilities of parenthood, yet now claims the emotional authority of a biological mother when it suits her purposes. She painted me as a calculating stepmother who had slowly poisoned Martin's relationship with his daughter, who had manipulated him during his illness to change his will in her favor. According to her version, Travis's taking money from the company wasn't theft. It was legitimate compensation that Martin had approved but failed to document properly. The real question, she concluded, is why a woman who claims to love her stepdaughter would send her to prison rather than work out a family solution to what amounts to a misunderstanding about inheritance and business finances. The opening statements set the battle lines clearly. This would be a war not just over facts, but over narrative: who was the victim, who was the villain, and what constituted justice versus revenge. The prosecution began presenting their case, starting with the financial evidence. Bank records were entered into evidence, showing the systematic diversion of funds from Drake Construction Company accounts into Travis's personal accounts. Forged signatures were highlighted, with handwriting experts testifying to the deliberate nature of the fraud. The private investigator, William Hayes, not to be confused with the prosecutor, took the stand to describe his months of surveillance and documentation. He presented photographs of Travis at the Foxwoods Casino, losing thousands of dollars while his company paychecks sat undeposited. He detailed the pattern of theft that had accelerated in the months before Martin's death. Mr. Cole knew his father-in-law was ill, the investigator testified. He seemed to be rushing to take as much as possible before the situation was discovered. Travis's former secretary from Drake Construction, Diane Mercer, testified about suspicious transactions she had been asked to process, about Travis's nervousness when certain clients called about missing payments, about finding him in Martin's office after hours, going through confidential files. "I try to tell Mr. Drake about some of the things I was seeing," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "He was such a good man, so trusting. He kept saying Travis was family, that there must be an explanation." By the end of the first day, the prosecution had established a clear pattern of embezzlement that was impossible to deny. Travis sat at the defense table looking increasingly pale, while Savannah seemed to be trying to distance herself from her husband's actions. That evening, I sat in my study with a glass of wine, reviewing the day's testimony with Franklin. "How do you think it went?" I asked. "Very well. The evidence is overwhelming, and the jury is clearly sympathetic to your situation." He paused. "Tomorrow is when you testify. Are you ready?" I looked at the family photo on Martin's desk. The three of us from Savannah's college graduation, all of us smiling, all of us believing we had many more happy years ahead of us. "I'm ready," I said. "It's time to tell the truth." I woke at 5 a.m. on the morning I was scheduled to testify, though I had hardly slept. Not from nervousness. I had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. Rather, from anticipation. Today, I would finally have the chance to tell my story in my own words, under oath, with Savannah forced to listen to every syllable. I took extra care with my appearance, choosing a navy blue suit that Martin had always said made me look dignified and authoritative. My gray hair was styled in a perfect chignon, my pearls gleamed softly at my throat, and my makeup was flawless, but understated. I would look exactly like what I was, a woman of substance who had been wronged by her own family. Franklin picked me up at 8:30, and we drove to the courthouse in comfortable silence. The media circus had only intensified. There were now 3 news vans and at least a dozen reporters waiting on the courthouse steps. "Mrs. Drake. Mrs. Drake," they called as I walked past. "How are you feeling about testifying against your own daughter?" I paused and turned to face them, allowing the cameras to capture my composed expression. "I'm feeling that justice needs to be served, regardless of family relationships." "Do you have any regrets about pressing charges?" "My only regret," I said clearly, "is that I raised a daughter who could look at her mother's grief and see opportunity." Inside the courtroom, I took my place behind the prosecution table, acutely aware of Savannah's eyes on me. She had been brought from jail early that morning, and she looked even worse than she had the previous day. Her skin was pale, her hair limp, and her orange jumpsuit seemed to hang on her diminished frame. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with steady steps. The bailiff asked me to raise my right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. I do, I said clearly, looking directly at the jury. Prosecutor Hayes approached the stand. Please state your name for the record. Sarah Elizabeth Drake. Mrs. Drake, how long were you married to Martin Drake? 37 years. We married in 1987 when his daughter Savannah was 2 years old. Can you tell us about your relationship with Savannah during those years? I turned slightly toward the jury, making eye contact with several of them. I raised her as my own daughter. Her biological mother had died in a car accident, and Martin was struggling to balance single parenthood with building his business. I loved that little girl from the moment I met her. Did you legally adopt Savannah? No, though not for lack of trying. Martin felt it was important for her to keep her mother's name as a connection to her biological heritage. But in every way that mattered, I was her mother. I taught her to read, helped with her homework, stayed up all night when she had the flu. I planned her birthday parties, taught her to drive, helped her choose her wedding dress. Several jurors were nodding, and I could see the sympathy in their eyes. Mrs. Drake, can you tell us about the day after your husband's funeral? This was the moment I had been preparing for. I took a deep breath and let the pain show in my voice, not dramatically, but genuinely. I was exhausted from the funeral and the reception. It had been a long day, and I was looking forward to some quiet time to process my grief. But Savannah and Travis cornered me in my own living room and told me they needed to talk about the estate. What did they tell you? They said everything belonged to Savannah now. The house, the business, all of Martin's investments, everything. They said I had no legal claim to any of it. How did that make you feel?
Shocked.
Devastated. Not because of the money, but because of the callousness. My husband had been buried less than 24 hours earlier, and they were already dividing up his possessions. What happened next? They told me I needed to be out of the house by the next morning. Travis said, I paused, looking directly at him. He said, We're not giving you a dime. We own everything now. And how did your daughter respond to this? This was the moment that would damn Savannah in the eyes of the jury, and I delivered it with perfect composure. She told me that her father had never really loved me, that I was just convenient. She said the house was meant for her and Travis, that they had plans to renovate and modernize it. I looked directly at Savannah. She said I had to accept that I wasn't really part of the family. Several jurors looked shocked. One elderly woman actually gasped. Mrs. Drake, what was your response to this? I was too stunned to respond effectively, but I remember thinking that the daughter I had raised would never speak to anyone that way, much less her own mother. Hayes walked me through the rest of the testimony. Franklin's arrival with Martin's real will, the discovery of the embezzlement evidence, the realization that my husband had been protecting me even from beyond the grave. Mrs. Drake, why did you decide to press criminal charges rather than try to resolve this within the family? I considered the question carefully, because what they did wasn't a family dispute. It was a crime. Travis stole over $200,000 from my husband's business. They conspired to defraud me of my inheritance. They planned to make me homeless. Those aren't family problems, they're criminal acts. Do you have any regrets about your decision? None whatsoever. I believe in accountability. I believe that actions have consequences. And I believe that being related to someone doesn't give you the right to steal from them. Then it was Patricia Kellerman's turn for cross-examination. She stood slowly, like a predator, sizing up her prey. Mrs. Drake, isn't it true that you never legally adopted Savannah Cole? That's correct, though, as I explained. Just yes or no, please. You never legally adopted her, correct? Correct. And isn't it true that in the months before your husband's death, you had significant influence over his medical care and daily routine? I was his wife and primary caregiver, yes. Isn't it true that you had multiple private meetings with his attorney during that time? We met to discuss estate planning, yes. Estate planning that resulted in you inheriting everything and his biological daughter inheriting nothing? I felt my temper rising but kept my voice level. Estate planning that protected me from exactly what happened. His daughter trying to steal my home and leave me destitute. Mrs. Drake, isn't it possible that your husband was not of sound mind when he changed his will? He was on multiple medications, suffering from a terminal illness. My husband was sharp until the day he died, I said firmly. He changed his will because he discovered that Travis was stealing from his company and that they were planning to betray me. Or because you manipulated a sick, elderly man into cutting out his own child. Prosecutor Hayes stood. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained. Judge Whitfield ruled. Kellerman tried several more approaches, attempting to paint me as a manipulative stepmother, questioning my motives, suggesting that I was motivated by greed rather than justice. But she had no evidence to support any of her theories, and I had the advantage of being completely truthful. After 45 minutes of cross-examination, she finally gave up. No further questions. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. I had told my story, under oath, in front of a jury and a packed courtroom. I had looked my daughter in the eye and described exactly what she had done to me. And I had done it all with dignity and composure. The rest of the prosecution's case moved quickly. Character witnesses testified about my reputation in the community, about the kind of stepmother I had been to Savannah. Martin's doctor testified that my husband had been mentally sharp until his death, capable of making legal decisions. By Friday afternoon, the prosecution rested their case. Judge Whitfield looked at the defense table. Ms. Kellerman, are you prepared to present your case? Patricia Kellerman stood. Your Honor, at this time the defense calls Savannah Cole to the stand. This would be interesting. I had been wondering whether Savannah would testify on her own behalf, and apparently she had decided to take the risk. As my daughter walked to the witness stand in her orange jumpsuit, I felt no maternal sympathy, no urge to protect her from what was coming. She had made her choices. Now she would face the consequences. Under oath, just as I had. Watching Savannah testify was like watching a stranger wear my daughter's face. She sat in the witness chair, her hands folded in her lap, trying to project an image of remorse and victimhood that might have worked if I hadn't known her so well. Patricia Kellerman began with softball questions, establishing Savannah's version of events. According to my daughter's testimony, she had genuinely believed that her father's original will was valid. She claimed that Travis's financial dealings with the company were legitimate business transactions that had been misinterpreted. Most importantly, she painted herself as a daughter who had been trying to protect her inheritance from a stepmother who had manipulated her dying father. I loved my daddy, Savannah said, tears streaming down her face. Everything I did was because I thought it's what he would have wanted. I thought the house should stay in the Drake bloodline. It was a performance worthy of a soap opera, complete with strategic pauses and calculated emotion. But I could see the jury wasn't buying it. They had heard too much evidence, seen too many documents, listened to too many witnesses who painted a very different picture. Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Hayes approached the witness stand like a shark scenting blood. Ms. Cole, you testified that you believed your father's original will was valid, correct? Yes. And yet you never asked to see the will before confronting Mrs. Drake, did you? Savannah hesitated.
We,
Travis had already seen it. That's not what I asked. You personally never requested to see the legal document you were basing your claim on, correct? No, but... And when Mrs. Drake was presented with the newer will, did you ask to examine it? Did you request verification from the attorney? We were in shock. Miss Cole, please answer the question. Did you ask to verify the document?
No.
Instead, you accused Mrs. Drake of manipulating your father. Isn't that right? I was emotional. You were angry that your plan to inherit everything had been thwarted, weren't you? Objection. Kellerman stood, argumentative. I'll rephrase, Hayes said smoothly. Miss Cole, when you told Mrs. Drake she needed to leave the house by the next morning, were you concerned about her welfare? About where an elderly woman would go with no notice? Savannah's composure was cracking. We thought she had other options. What other options? You were telling her she would inherit nothing. No money, no property, no support. Where exactly did you think she would go? I don't know, Savannah whispered. You don't know because you didn't care, did you? You were so focused on what you thought you were inheriting that you didn't consider what would happen to the woman who raised you. The tears were flowing freely now, but they looked different than before. Less theatrical, more genuinely distressed. And when you told Mrs. Drake that her father had never really loved her, that she was just convenient, those were your words, weren't they? Savannah couldn't speak. She just nodded. Miss Cole, I need you to answer audibly for the record. Yes, she whispered. But I didn't mean... You didn't mean to devastate a grieving widow? You didn't mean to attack the woman who had sacrificed to raise you as her own child. I was angry. You were cruel, Hayes said flatly. And that cruelty, combined with your husband's theft and your attempt to defraud Mrs. Drake of her inheritance, is why we're here today. By the time Hayes finished with her, Savannah was a wreck. She had admitted to most of the key facts of the case, destroyed her own credibility, and shown the jury exactly the kind of person she really was. Travis's testimony was even worse. He tried to claim that his financial dealings with Drake Construction had been authorized by Martin, but the prosecutor demolished him with bank records and witness testimony. When confronted with evidence of his gambling debts and the systematic nature of his theft, he broke down completely. I never meant for it to go so far, he sobbed. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. I thought Martin would understand. Understand what? Hayes pressed. That you were stealing from the man who had treated you like a son? I had debts, the casino. I thought I could win it back. It was pathetic, really. This man who had swaggered into my living room 6 weeks ago, so confident in his right to steal from me, was now reduced to sniveling excuses about gambling addiction and financial pressure. The defense case collapsed within 2 days. Kellerman had no credible witnesses, no evidence to support her theory of manipulation, nothing but desperate attempts to paint me as the villain in a story where the facts clearly identified the real criminals. During closing arguments, Hayes summarized the evidence methodically, building an unshakable case for conviction on all charges. He reminded the jury of my testimony, of the pain in my voice when I described my daughter's betrayal, of the overwhelming evidence of Travis's theft. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about more than money, he concluded. It's about the most fundamental bonds of trust, between parent and child, between family members, between people who are supposed to love and protect each other. The defendants didn't just steal money. They stole from the heart of what family is supposed to mean. Kellerman's closing argument was a desperate attempt to resurrect her manipulation theory, but it fell flat. The jury had seen the evidence, heard the testimony, and made up their minds. Judge Whitfield gave the jury their instructions at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. They deliberated for exactly 3 hours. I was in Franklin's office when the call came. Mrs. Drake, his secretary, said, "The court clerk just called. The jury has reached a verdict." My heart was pounding as we drove back to the courthouse. The media circus had intensified. Word had gotten out that a verdict was coming, and the courthouse steps were packed with reporters and cameras. Inside, the courtroom was electric with tension. Savannah and Travis sat at the defense table, both looking like they might be sick. When I entered, Savannah turned to look at me one last time, her eyes pleading for some sign of mercy or forgiveness. I looked right through her and took my seat. Judge Whitfield called the court to order. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a retired teacher in her 60s, stood up. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of embezzlement in the first degree against Travis Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty, Your Honor." Travis's legs buckled, and he had to grab the defense table for support. "On the charge of wire fraud against Travis Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud against Travis Cole, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit inheritance fraud against Savannah Cole, how do you find?"
Guilty.
"On the charge of attempted elderly financial abuse against Savannah Cole, how do you find?"
Guilty.
Savannah was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. But I felt only a deep, profound satisfaction. Justice had been served. Judge Whitfield set sentencing for the following month, then dismissed the jury with thanks for their service. Several jurors looked at me sympathetically as they filed out, and one elderly gentleman actually nodded his approval. As the bailiffs prepared to escort Savannah and Travis back to jail, my daughter turned to me one last time. "Mother, please," she said, her voice breaking.
I'm sorry.
"I'm so sorry." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked past her without a word. Some apologies come too late. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some choices have consequences that last forever. Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting. "Mrs. Drake, how do you feel about the verdicts?" I paused at the top of the steps, looking out at the crowd of reporters and cameras. Behind me was a courthouse where justice had just been served. Ahead of me was the rest of my life. "I feel," I said clearly, "that accountability matters. That family loyalty should go both ways. And that no one, no matter who they are to you, has the right to steal from you and expect to get away with it." "Do you have any message for your daughter?" I considered the question carefully. "I have no daughter," I said finally. "I had a daughter once, but she died the day she told me I wasn't family." Sentencing day arrived on a cold December morning. I wore my black wool coat and my best pearls, the ones Martin had given me for our 20th anniversary. As I walked into the courthouse for what I knew would be the final chapter of this ordeal, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing from my life since Martin's death. The courtroom was packed again, but this time the energy was different. The trial was over, the verdicts were in, and now it was time for Judge Whitfield to decide how much prison time my daughter and her husband would serve for their crimes. I took my usual seat behind the prosecution table and waited. Travis was brought in first, wearing an ill-fitting suit that his lawyer had probably borrowed for the occasion. 6 weeks in jail had aged him considerably. His hair was grayer, his face gaunt, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man who had finally understood the full scope of his mistakes. Then came Savannah. My heart should have broken seeing my daughter in her orange jumpsuit, shackled and pale. But instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. Judge Whitfield called the court to order. "We're here today for sentencing in the matter of the state versus Travis Cole and Savannah Cole. Before I impose sentence, I'll hear from the victims." Prosecutor Hayes nodded to me. "Your Honor, Mrs. Drake would like to make a victim impact statement." I rose and walked to the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me. This would be my final word on the matter, my last chance to speak directly to the people who had tried to destroy me. "Your Honor, my name is Sarah Drake, and I am the victim of these defendants' crimes." My voice was strong, clear, carrying easily to every corner of the courtroom. But I want to be very clear about what they stole from me. It wasn't just money, though they tried to steal that too. It wasn't just my home, though they planned to take that as well. I looked directly at Savannah, who was crying quietly at the defense table. What they stole was my faith in family. What they stole was my belief that the child I had raised, the daughter I had loved unconditionally for 36 years, would never look at my grief and see opportunity. Several people in the courtroom were wiping their eyes, but I continued without emotion. Travis Cole stole over $200,000 from my late husband's business. But more than that, he stole my husband's trust. Martin Drake treated this man like a son, and Travis repaid that love with theft and betrayal. I turned to look at Travis, who couldn't meet my eyes. Savannah Cole conspired to defraud me of my inheritance and leave me homeless. But more than that, she killed the mother-daughter relationship I had treasured for decades. She told me I wasn't family, that her father had never loved me, that I was just convenient. Those words can never be taken back. My voice grew stronger, more forceful. Your Honor, I ask for the maximum sentence allowed by law. Not because I'm vindictive, but because accountability matters. Because actions must have consequences. Because the next elderly person these defendants encounter deserves to be protected from their cruelty and greed. I returned to my seat, feeling lighter than I had in months. Judge Whitfield then heard from the defense attorneys, who made predictable pleas for mercy, talked about remorse and rehabilitation, promised that their clients had learned their lesson. Finally, she asked the defendants if they wanted to make statements before sentencing. Travis stood first, his voice shaking. Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I stole from a man who had been like a father to me, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I was gambling, I was desperate, and I made terrible choices. I'm sorry, and I'm ready to face the consequences. Then it was Savannah's turn. She stood slowly, her orange jumpsuit wrinkled, her face streaked with tears. Your Honor, I know I hurt my mother terribly. I said things I can never take back, and I participated in something that was wrong. She turned to look at me. Mother, I know you probably can't forgive me, but I want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you, and I'm sorry I forgot that when it mattered most. I looked at her steadily, feeling nothing. Love was action, not words. And her actions had spoken louder than any apology ever could. Judge Whitfield reviewed the sentencing guidelines, considered the evidence, and rendered her decision. Mr. Cole, you have been convicted of embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The evidence shows a systematic pattern of theft from your father-in-law's business, motivated by gambling addiction and personal greed. You've violated the trust of a man who had welcomed you into his family and given you opportunities you hadn't earned. She paused, looking directly at him. I sentence you to 8 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 5 years. You are also ordered to make full restitution of the $200,000 you stole, plus interest and penalties. Travis collapsed back into his chair, the weight of 8 years hitting him like a physical blow. Ms. Cole, you have been convicted of conspiracy and attempted elderly financial abuse. While you were not directly involved in the embezzlement, your participation in the scheme to defraud your stepmother was equally reprehensible. You targeted an elderly widow in her time of grief and tried to leave her homeless and destitute. Judge Whitfield's voice grew stern. What makes your crime particularly heinous is the family relationship. Mrs. Drake raised you from the age of 2, loved you as her own child, and your response to her generosity was to betray her in the most cruel way possible. Savannah was sobbing openly now. I sentence you to 4 years in state prison, with possibility of parole after 2 years. You are prohibited from contacting Mrs. Drake directly or indirectly for the duration of your sentence, and for 5 years following your release. The bailiffs moved forward to escort them back to jail, but before they could, Savannah broke away and turned toward me one last time. Mother, please. Ma'am, you need to come with us now, the bailiff said firmly, taking her arm. As they led her away, she looked back over her shoulder, her eyes desperate and pleading. But I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my expression serene. I had no daughter. Not anymore. After the courthouse emptied, I sat alone in my Mercedes as Harrison waited patiently behind the wheel. The December sky was gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. Justice had been served, but justice was cold comfort when it came at the cost of family. Where to, Mrs. Drake? Harrison asked gently.
Home, I said.
Just home. The drive took us through the Connecticut countryside I had loved for 30 years, past the covered bridges and stone walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of the Drake family fortune. As we turned into my circular driveway, I looked up at the house that Martin and I had built together, the home that Savannah and Travis had tried to steal from me. It was mine now completely and legally. 12 acres of pristine land, a mansion filled with antiques and memories, and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I had won. So, why did victory taste so bitter? Over the next few months, I settled into my new reality. The media attention gradually faded, though the story occasionally resurfaced in true crime documentaries and legal blogs. I was always portrayed sympathetically, the dignified widow who had sought justice against her own family. I donated Martin's construction company to his longtime employees, who had been loyal to him and deserved to benefit from their years of service. The $200,000 that Travis would never be able to repay came out of Savannah's eventual inheritance, which meant she would leave prison with nothing but the clothes on her back. Just as she had planned for me. I redecorated the house, erasing every trace of Savannah and Travis from my home. I hired new staff, planted new gardens, and created new routines that belonged only to me. I traveled to Europe, visited old friends, and slowly built a life that didn't include the daughter who had betrayed me. But late at night, in the silence of my grand house, I sometimes found myself wondering if I had chosen justice or revenge. If I had done what was right or simply what felt satisfying. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through Franklin's office. It was from Savannah, written on prison stationery in the careful handwriting I had taught her as a child. Dear Mother, it began. I know you probably won't read this, but I had to try. I think about that day every single moment I'm awake. I think about the look on your face when I told you Daddy never loved you, and I want to die from shame. I was wrong about everything. Wrong about the money, wrong about what family means, wrong about who you are, and what you meant to Daddy and me. The letter went on for pages, detailing her regrets, her insights about her mistakes, her desperate hope that someday I might find it in my heart to forgive her. I read it twice, then carried it to the fireplace in Martin's study and watched it burn. Some bridges, once destroyed, can never be rebuilt. Some words, once spoken, can never be forgotten. Some betrayals cut so deep that forgiveness becomes impossible, not because the victim is unforgiving, but because the wound has fundamentally changed who they are. A year later, I was tending my roses when Helen Radcliffe brought me news that Savannah had been released early for good behavior. She's back in town, Helen said gently. Living in a small apartment downtown, working at that new restaurant on Main Street. I continued pruning my roses, my shears making clean, precise cuts. How nice for her. Sarah, she's been asking about you, wondering if you might be willing to see her. I looked up at my oldest friend, seeing the concern in her eyes. Helen had been through this entire ordeal with me, had supported my decisions even when she didn't fully understand them. And what did you tell her? I told her that some things can't be fixed with time and good intentions. I nodded and went back to my roses. They were beautiful this year, full and fragrant, the result of careful tending and ruthless pruning. Sometimes you had to cut away the diseased parts to save the whole plant. That evening, I sat in my garden with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house behind me was perfect, the gardens around me were flourishing, and my bank account was more than adequate for anything I might need. I had everything I had fought for. I was safe, secure, and vindicated. But I was also alone. As the stars came out, I raised my glass in a toast to Martin, wherever he might be. I kept my promise, my love. I whispered to the gathering darkness. I didn't let them win. I didn't let them convince me I was worthless. I fought back and I won.